Very much. Welcome, everybody. It is a great pleasure, always to see everybody online. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Yuko Honda, and I am the Executive Director of the Japan Society of Boston. Today's event is a really special one, especially because we are co-hosting this event with the Japan Society of Canada. So everybody joining us from Canada, thank you for joining us. It is wonderful to have you here. It is a great pleasure. And Asami-san, thank you for doing this with me. Asami-san is here. I think she can wave at us. Anyhow, this is a program that I have been personally really been looking forward to, especially because I have to admit, I've never been on the Shikoku Pilgrimage, but it's definitely something that I have always wanted to do. And who but John Lander to ask, to share with us his experience through his lenses, what the Shikoku Pilgrimage is. So Mr. Lander is a freelance photographer based near Kamakura, Japan. When he is not home, he is out and about on photography assignments at local events, festivals, or indulging in his passion, Japanese gardens. Japan has been a home for Mr. Lander for nearly 40 years, and his photography, has been featured in GEO, Time Magazine, National Geographic, Travel and Leisure, and Rough Guides, and many other publications. Before I ask Johnson to come on, I want to let you all know that chat is open. Please send in all your questions through chat, and also tell us, where are you joining us from? I always love seeing where everybody's based. So send us a little hello, let us know where you're joining us from. And for any questions, please send them in chat. And I know you didn't come here to see me speak. So John-san, the stage is all yours.
Good morning or good evening, everybody on the West Coast and in Canada. I'm John, and as she very kindly introduced me, I'm in Zushi, which is near Kamakura, but I've been down to Shikoku about 10 or 12 times over the past 20 years. And I started off going down there. I used to write feature articles for magazines and Sunday travel features. And my original interest in Shikoku was the inland sea, inspired by Donald Ritchie. I think Japan Society Boston is doing a feature on that next week. Anyway, that was my introduction to Shikoku, and I'd never heard of the Shikoku Pilgrimage until I got down there, and I saw a few pilgrims wandering around, and I asked about it, and people said, oh, that's kind of a big deal here, and they explained briefly what it was all about. So that got me going back to Shikoku many times over the past 10 years or so afterwards. So and I finally completed it last year, despite all the risks involved. Shikoku hasn't really been touched that badly by COVID, so I felt safe walking around there. But very few pilgrims are out and about, except Japanese residents or people who live around there. Not too many people out and about, especially now. Well, it's winter, so not many people go doing that. So I'm going to put up my slideshow presentation. And so I checked around to see where the book's available. I'll put this up at the final screen, but some people may not feel comfortable with Amazon. So I found that it's available at Harvard Bookstore, Porter Square, and Brookline. And my author page for Amazon is bit.ly/John Lander. And the Amazon US link is Amazon Shikoku, bit.ly/Amazon Shikoku. Let's get right down to it. So it was difficult to get the front cover photo, but the local guide in Tokushima helped me with this and drove me around, and she posed for photos and showed me some scenic spots. And we went to about 5 or 6 temples while we were down there. Anyway, the trail length takes, I think it's 1,200 kilometers, and it takes normally about 6 weeks if people do it on foot. Nowadays, there are bus tours, and people do it on bicycle. People do it bus, trains, and rental bikes. I did a combination of all of them: local city buses, trains, bicycle, motorcycle, car. Uh, I'm I will turn 70 years old in a couple of weeks, so my knees are not very strong, and carrying heavy photographic equipment required me to use public transportation and motorcycles and be driven around by cars. So I would really like to have done it on foot, which is the classic method. And people who are fit and able to do so, I encourage them to do it the I shouldn't say the right way, but it is the traditional way of doing the pilgrimage. And the motivations for doing it are very, very wide and varied. Some people just want to get away from it all. Some people are having a change in life experience, a divorce or a new job, or recovery from an illness. There's so many different reasons why people do this, and some people just do it for the hell of it. In my case, it was I wanted to participate in something like this, but I also wanted to photograph it. So my motivations were different than most people's, but what I'm trying to say is many people approach the pilgrimage for various different reasons and many different reasons, and that's a good thing. But there's no one real reason why people do this, and it's not necessarily a religious ceremony, although for some people it is. It's very deeply felt, and that should not be discouraged either. But most people I have met are not doing it for particularly religious reasons. Kobodaishi is the guy on the left, and Gyoki is the guy on the right. Kobodaishi is given credit for most of the temples in Shikoku, even though it's predated by Gyoki, who established some of the oldest temples there. And but Kobodaishi gets the credit for most of the Shikoku pilgrimage, and he is like on a pilgrim hats and jackets, it says, "I walk with Kobodaishi." And Kobodaishi is kind of a folk hero in Japan. He established universal education, first schools for people who were not from the elite, and literacy for the masses. And so Kobodaishi is dear to the hearts of many people in Japan. And the Shikoku pilgrimage is very much part of his legacy. For me, and for many, I wouldn't say foreign, I was going to say foreign pilgrims, but I think Japanese appreciate this too, is the concept of osatai, which means hospitable giving. And community groups along the trail, individuals, school kids, school groups, neighbors of temples along the trail will stop and give you bottles of water, offer to give you a ride, a place to sleep, money. I've been offered money. And it's, people are not accustomed to, in today's cold, cruel world, of receiving such kindness. But this is very much part of the Shikoku culture. is the concept of osotai, and they're very, very nice. This was at a temple towards the end of the trail where local community groups got together to give coffee, water, and snacks to pilgrims on the way. And it's a beautiful custom. And I'll talk a little bit more about osotai later, but because it involves not only coffee and water and snacks, but it also involves rest huts, maintenance of the trails, various aspects of the entire pilgrimage. And it's very much, it's an important part of the pilgrimage, because without it, it would be very difficult to do so. And in the past, there weren't such things as 7-Elevens and convenience stores every 1 or 2 kilometers or on every street corner. So people depended on this to get water or a place to eat, or people depended on it. Now people are less dependent on it, but it's still a wonderful thing that, for me, it's the most important part of the pilgrimage. Okay, the Pilgrim Huts, these are all around, I think there are about 80 of them now. And these are maintained and built and paid for by local communities and locals in Shikoku. And it's very controversial topic of people camping out in them and sleeping in them. And people should not do so without the permission of the local cops or the local neighbors. If there's a house next door to a hut, you should ask permission to use it. It's very controversial to just lay out your sleeping bag and crash there, because they're really meant as just a rest stop to stop and rest your legs and have a little nap or a sip of your water and all of that. But they're not really for camping out in, and people would be wise to follow that custom of not just invading the huts and camping out in them without permission. Another form of the osotai is community groups maintain the trails, put up signs. Of course, they're almost always in Japanese, not in English, but you get the idea which way to go because of the arrows. It's pretty self-explanatory. But these are another form of the osotai, is people helping others to go on their pilgrimage. And it's as I say, you would not be able to do it without their help. The pilgrims are very widely, Japanese, foreigners, all kinds of people do this, and I already explained their motivations. I interviewed 4 different pilgrims, 2 Japanese and 3 Japanese and 2 foreigners. So one of the Japanese I used as the introduction because she's done the trail about 10 or 20 times. I forgot. She's in her 80s now, but she runs a Henro House near Temple Number 1, and she gets new pilgrims oriented and helps them buy their gear and their vests and their hats and their staffs, and explains the protocols and the do's and don'ts of doing the trail. And so she was perfect for the introduction to the book. So I used her interview as the introduction because it was so complete. But these other pilgrims I interviewed, and they each have their own page right in the middle of the book. The editors and I decided we wanted, okay, there are 88 temples, but it's very easy to be fatigued by, we call it temple fatigue, and it's just temple, temple, temple. No matter how wonderful the temple may be, it becomes a little bit tedious after a while. So we decided to break it up. So the interviews with the pilgrims are right in the middle of the book. It sort of divides it into sections, and we also divide it into four sections after the introduction and explanation of Osatai and all of this into the 4 different prefectures of Shikoku. Prefectures are like counties or states in Japan, in the US, or provinces in Canada. And so the 4 different prefectures each have different characteristics which are of interest to visitors and people who are not familiar with Shikoku and the pilgrimage. I always encourage people to take their time in doing this and not just rush through the pilgrimage as if it's some kind of marathon or stamp collecting rally or something like that, but to go slow and stop and smell the roses. And so we divided the book into 4 different sections and show the highlights of each prefecture. One of the possibilities of sleeping along the pilgrimage are temple stays. At the moment, a lot of them are closed to visitors because of the pandemic, but hopefully they will reopen in a year or so once we got it back under control. But at a temple stay, you usually have to share the space, a tatami room, with other pilgrims, and if you're lucky, they may have vegetarian temple cuisine, which is called shojin ryori. It's beautiful, but it's not, I can't say it's really very filling, but it's very beautiful and it's very healthy. It's a little bit rare in Shikoku though, but very much part of the scene in Koyasan, which is the very end of the pilgrimage if you do it according to tradition. People, after doing 88 temples of Shikoku, they go up to Koyasan, which is the burial place of Kobodaishi, and it's a monastery town up in the mountains. Actually, it's closer to Osaka than Shikoku, but Koyasan is the place, and all the temples there have temple stays and vegetarian temple cuisine. There are hardly any restaurants in town, so that's what you get. So that's the place to sample temple cuisine, and even now I think a lot of the monasteries are still open for temple stays. The Pilgrim Gear is most of the pilgrims that I know, they just wear the vest and a baseball cap or something to protect their head from the sun, because wearing the vest identifies you to other pilgrims and to local people in Shikoku, so they know who you are and what your purpose is, so they don't think you're just a wandering bum, but they know what you're about, so they're not likely to call the cops on you or something for just loitering in a temple hut, in a pilgrim hut or something. People know what you're about, not that anybody would bother you anyway, but it's always good to wear a pilgrim vest, and they even have t-shirt versions of this, so I wouldn't say it's a must, but it's very helpful. Okay, there are certain protocols a person follows in visiting each temple. Let's see. I was too busy with photographing to pay too much attention to this, but most people would like to know how to do what do you do when you get to each temple. You go to the main gate and you bow once, then there will be a wash basin and you wash your hands and your mouth as a kind of purification. You go to the bell tower and you ring the temple bell once. Name slips. You will write your name and address and the date, and you put these little name slips in the wish box in the main hall. And they're also something that you give to when people give you osadaya, water, coffee, money, snacks, oranges along the trail, it's polite to give them a name slip as well. It's the custom to do that. And you can buy these on Amazon, or you can get them at near temple number 1, or actually several temples along the way. They have shops nearby where you can buy things like this if your hat is going off, or your vest is getting too dirty and you want a new one, or you need some new name slips. You can get all that. And let's see what else. The pilgrimage book seal stamp, it's on the right here. Each temple, there will be one of the monks or one of the temple staff will fill in your stamp book. Each stamp costs 300 yen at each temple, which really adds up. But these stamp books are become keepsakes for pilgrims, and some people are even buried with them because they're so precious as a memento of their journey. And some of the calligraphy is quite beautiful, as you can see, and the stamps. Some of them are works of art, really. And then you exit the main gate and you bow once, and that's the end of each temple's sort of protocol. All right, as I mentioned, we separated each of the 4 parts of Shikoku into the 4 different prefectures, and with 2 or 3 pages devoted to the special attractions of each prefecture. The picture on the left is of a Nagoro scarecrow village. It's way up in the hills in Tokushima Prefecture. It's really hard to reach up in the Iya Valley, but Iya Valley has become kind of a tourist destination because it's so rural and it's so peaceful up there. And there's a vine bridge built of vines, and it's quite a place, actually. And Tokushima has a lot to offer, really, and that's one of the things. The other is the Awa Odori dance, which is all over Japan, really, but Tokushima is the birthplace of it, and every year it's a big deal, not just in Tokushima but all over Japan. But Tokushima is the headquarters for the whole thing because that's where it started. Unfortunately, the past couple of years it's been canceled, but hopefully it'll be back next summer or the summer after. And the Awa Odori dance, you can see the hat and the kimono and the whole thing. Temple number 1, Ryozanji, is the beginning of the trail, and in Tokushima, and lots of activity here. It's a very bustling, active place because this is where pilgrims start off. They get their gear, their vests, their hats, their stamp books, their name slips, everything, and get oriented towards the beginning of the trail. And it's particularly bustling because it's also officially the end of the trail. Even though there are 88 temples on the trail, most serious pilgrims don't feel like they've done it completely until they've gone back to temple number 1 and done the full circle. And even then, it's not completely complete until they've been up to Koyasan, which is a completely different island, which is where Kobodaishi is buried. I'll talk more about Koyasan at the very end because it is the very end. Anyway, Ryozanji is the beginning, and there's a sweet garden in the back, but the main temple buildings are a beehive of activity. Interior has an impressive array of lanterns inside. You'll notice we're skipping on to Temple 3, Konsenji. This is further along the trail, and there's no time. In the book, all 88 temples are covered, including Koyasan. But some of them are less impressive than others. And since Japanese gardens are my specialty, if if a temple doesn't have a garden or particularly impressive architecture, usually I don't give it that much space. But we included all 88 of them. And my apologies if your favorite temple is not given a double page spread, but that's my motivation. If it has a temple garden or a garden of any kind, or impressive architecture, usually I'm not that keen. But I included them and explained. Some of them are very impressive. Some of the temples are extremely impressive, and other ones not so much. But there may be some historical reason why it's important, and so it was important to include all of them because, for the sake of completeness. But also, even though the buildings may not be that wonderful, but there are reasons why it's part of the trail. Jizoji is impressive because it has a Rakan Hall behind the temple with, I forgot how many of them, I think hundreds. And locals call it Rakenji because of the Rakan Buddhist disciples, but its official name is Jizoji. This would be Shosenji. I can't find the title of it. I think it's Shosenji. Shosanji. This is one of the more difficult ones to reach. As a rule of thumb, I found that the more difficult they are to reach, the more impressive the temple is. Even though it's pretty tough to get up there, it's usually worth the effort. Shosanji was way up in the hills. And the Byodoji is very impressive architecturally. I was taken by the fresco ceiling at Byodoji, Temple 22. So we're close to the end of Tokushima Prefecture and now entering Kochi Prefecture, which is the wildest and woolliest of all the places in Shikoku. But for many people, it's a favorite. Kochi is kind of unique in Japan. They've got a very independent mindset. I don't detect it, but Japanese I've traveled with, they all always comment on they seem a little bit stubborn and difficult, and they have their own way of thinking. I'm always attracted to people like that. Anyway, I was treated very nicely there, and they people were very helpful, but it is wild and woolly, and some of the roads are really tough. The Moronto Peninsula is way down south, and it's famous for its. This is where Kobayashi reached enlightenment. At the bottom of the hill, there's a cave where he meditated and finally reached enlightenment in the Moronto Peninsula. One of the main attractions in Kochi Prefecture is the Chikarinji and Makino Botanical Garden, which is right next door to Chikarinji. It's a world-class botanical garden, and it used to be part of the grounds of Chikarinji Temple next door, and it's kind of a set. You kind of can't go to Chikarinji Temple without visiting Makino Gardens because it's right next door, and it's one of the highlights of Kochi Prefecture. So to my mind, it's kind of a must. Chikarinji is very impressive with a vertical garden out back. Most people don't even pay attention to the garden, but for me, that's a main thing, really. This was one of my very favorites, Konomineji. It's very, very, very difficult to reach, but worth every step of the way, And even though you're taking cars or motorcycles or buses, there will be hundreds and hundreds of steps you have to go up, no matter, even if you're taking public transportation. A person's going to be walking a lot. And so going up this vertical garden was rather a treat, for garden aficionados. Zinji Bhuji is near Chikurinji, and it has an impressive Fudo fountain statue going up the hill. Shoryuji it's on a tiny island off the coast of Koji, but nowadays it's connected by a causeway and bridge. But in the past, people had to take a little boat to get out there. It's a tiny little island just off the coast of Kochi City, and another one of my favorites, just because it's so rural and island-like and mossy. Okay, this one has a long story attached to it. It's one of the most difficult of all to reach. Kongo Fukuji, it's the tip of Ashizuri Peninsula, which is a very, very wild and woolly peninsula at the very tip in the southernmost part of Shikoku, and it's where hurricanes or typhoons hit first in Japan when they're heading this way up the Pacific Ocean. So it's kind of a bellwether. It took me 5 visits to Shikoku to finally get there, because it's so hard to reach, and the roads are terrible and narrow, and walking Henro complained that the road's so narrow, it's dangerous to walk along the road because it's so narrow. I took buses down there. It took forever, but it was worth it, as you can see. In Koji, for me, this has a famous tortoise covered in moss there, but for me it was the carp pond that did it in the garden in Koji. That was the last temple that I visited in Koji, or the last one we're going to talk about in Koji. The next prefecture is Ehime. Ehime is famous for lots of things: oranges, tangerines, and citrus fruit, and also Dogo Onsen. I first fell in love with Shikoku in Matsuyama. That's the main town in Ehime, because of its clunky little streetcars, Dogo Onsen. People take naps there, and I like yuzu, citron, and oranges. So it tends to be warm and cozy there. I like the weather there, and originally what brought me down to Shikoku in the first place was the inland sea, and Matsuyama's port connects it with Hiroshima by ferry boat. And I first fell in love with Shikoku in Matsuyama because of my first trip down there to visit the inland sea. The inland sea is a major waterway in Japan, and they call it that because it's basically ocean, but it's surrounded by islands, so it's very calm. There's no surf or anything, and it's good for shipping. And there's hundreds of tiny little islands out there, and a lot of them nowadays are uninhabited. But when Donald Ritchie wrote his book about the inland sea, a lot of them were still inhabited, but very lonely places. And he wanted to touch base with the real Japan and rural people in rural Japan. And that's what got me down to Shikoku in the first place. And I've never regretted it since. Iwayaji is one of the so-called cave temples. There's a little cave above the temple there for meditation, and if some people climb up there and meditate in there. Very difficult to reach, but well worth the effort to get up there. Nearby is a Jororiji with this impressive Lotus Pond. The buildings are a little bit dilapidated and shabby, but the Lotus Pond was great. Ishiteji is very important. It's right in town in Matsuyama, and even the streetcar goes nearby, and it covers many acres of buildings, gardens, pagodas, you name it. Also a little bit dilapidated, but it's a real hotspot for pilgrims because it has a lot to offer. And you will see lots of bus tours of pilgrim bus tours there. Temple number 52, the Taisanji attracted me because of its heaven and hell mural inside the gate. I think the central one is heaven. Hell is to the right and to the left, I think, but heaven takes place right in the middle, as it should, I suppose. Magamiji, also impressive for its architecture. Temple 64. People think that this has kind of Shinto shrine architecture rather than Buddhist temple architecture, but I found it impressive because of its long corridors leading up to it. Maybe that's a Shinto thing, so that's why people think that. I'm not sure why. Unpenji is a very difficult one to reach, but well worth the effort, and it's way up in the hills. But it had lots to offer. I'm only showing one picture of it, but I think the book has 2 or 3 because it's an important temple. Kagawa Prefecture, that's the last prefecture in Shikoku where the pilgrimage is winding up. Angel Road, this is actually one of the offshore islands in the Inland Sea. On Angel Road is actually not, it's Kagawa Prefecture, but it's on Shodoshima Island, and it's just offshore from Takamatsu. Lots of ferry boat action going around these little islands, and for me, that's one of the main attractions of Shikoku, is poking around on these little islands out there. Very peaceful places. And until recently, a lot of them were becoming uninhabited because there's no jobs. But the Triennial, it's a every 3-year art festival, and it takes place in these islands around Takamatsu, and it's become a big worldwide art event, and they put art installations on these islands to attract visitors, which bring, in the past, not the past couple of years anyway, but it brings in people from all over the world for this triennial, so-called triennial art festival. And they put in, I won't show the artwork here, but people go to these little islands and it's caused people to stay put, and instead of moving to Tokyo or Osaka. And so younger people are coming back and building Airbnbs and cafes and noodle shops and whatnot to keep local people involved in their little island and not move away. And it's working. Same thing with the Iya Valley up in Tokushima. They're trying to make it into a destination so that people will want to go there, and so people will stay and open up a pension or Airbnb or a noodle shop or something and stay home. And it seems to be working. Another big attraction in Kagawa, in Tokushima, not Tokushima, Takamatsu City, is Ritsurin Garden. There are 3 major gardens in Japan. Ritsurin is not one of them, but Ritsurin is almost every year voted in People's Choice, people's favorite choice, even though it's not one of the big 3 of Japan. In fact, there are thousands of gardens in Japan, but 3 of them are called the big 3, and only one of them, as a garden aficionado, only one of them maybe 2 of them really rates that highly. But to me, Ritsurin outranks all of them, really. It's a must, and it even has its own streetcar stop, and it's near a couple of other temples, and it's really a must when in Kagawa or Takamatsu. Temple 68, Jinain, is right next door to Kanonji. They share a compound. It's kind of rare to take care of two temples in one stop, but there it is. Jinain has this fantastic vertical garden behind it that nobody ever visits except people like me. And next door, Kanonji has this ancient tree with this huge root stump sticking out of it. Very impressive. Ryozanji, difficult to reach, but another sort of cave temple up in the hills outside of Takamatsu City. And Temple 75, Zen Sigi, very important temple because this was Kobodaishi's birthplace. So this temple has pagodas, also sprawling spread. They have a huge temple stay where you can stay overnight, cafeteria, pagoda. It's got lots of things to offer, and it's very important. In fact, it's the kind of headquarters for the Shikoku Pilgrimage. So no pilgrim would ever do the trail without stopping here. I stayed in their temple stay, which was quite nice, actually. I can't say so much for the food, though. Let's see, this would be Goshoji. Again, for me, the main thing was the temple garden behind the temple. There's even a Shinto shrine in the grounds. Sometimes this happens in Japanese temple grounds. There you'll find a Shinto shrine, which is a completely different religion, right within the temple, sort of smack in the middle of it sometimes. Shiromaneji, also impressive because it's rock formations near the main hall. This was one of my favorites, not just because of the giant Zen garden, but which nobody even seems to know is there. They don't make much of it, but it's there and it's well maintained. But this was one of my favorite temples because this is where I experienced the community osotai, free coffee session, and oranges and snacks and croissants and you name it, by the community group giving out stuff. So I hung out there quite a while because I wanted to talk to the pilgrims and load up on coffee and water and check out the gardens too. But this was one of my favorites. I know pilgrims who don't think much of this temple, but I think for every pilgrim, each temple has its own little memory. And if you're treated kindly by the community group or the temple monks or the neighbors, or people are nice to you, you tend to like that temple. Or if it has spectacular architecture or a fabulous garden, then you tend to have certain memories of it. Whereas if somebody barks at you or is not particularly friendly to you at another temple, no matter how wonderful the temple itself may be, you may not have fond memories of it. So I think every pilgrim has his own preferences, and this is mine. This is the end of the line is Temple 88, Okuboji. There are 88 temples altogether. But as I mentioned, most pilgrims don't feel like they've done the entire pilgrimage unless they have gone back to temple number 1, Ryozanji, and then finally on to Koyasan, which is not even on Shikoku. It's closer to us. It's in Wakayama Prefecture. So people go back to temple number 1. They go to the ferry port in Tokushima and go over to Wakayama and take a train up to Koyasan, where there are temple. In fact, that's all there are is temple stays. And this is the largest Zen garden in Japan. Koyasan, besides being part of the end of the line for the Shikoku Pilgrimage, is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it's very impressive. And one of the main things at Koyasan is the cemetery, Okunoin Cemetery, which is where Kobayashi is buried. I've never been in there at night. The idea of going into a cemetery at night is kind of spooky, but I have friends who've gone in there at night. They told me it's lit up with candles because people go visit Kobadashi's burial place, and they feel it's more spiritual or something at night with candle lit up by candles. But I've never been in there at night. But in the daytime, it's pretty impressive. And there are a few wacky gravestones in there. Lots of famous people in Japan are buried here. The president of UCC Coffee has a gravestone of a big coffee cup, and one of the Japanese astronauts, there's a picture where there's a rocket ship gravestone for that person's grave. So it's a major cemetery, not just because of Kobayashi, but anyway, that's part of the UNESCO World Heritage thing. Besides the monasteries themselves and the whole scene, I stayed at Ekoin, which is favored by foreigners because the monks speak English and they're used to dealing with foreign visitors, and they have a fire ceremony every morning, I think 5 o'clock, which everybody's invited to attend. They had shojin jewelry, temple cuisine, the whole thing was available. And the monks were kind of interesting to talk to. I sort of bonded with a couple of them, and one of their buddies drove in from a neighboring temple in a huge Hummer, and we all laughed at the Hummer. And I asked the monk with the Hummer, how many meters per liter do you get on that thing instead of kilometers? And they all thought that was hilarious. Anyway. As I mentioned earlier in the talk, I checked to see what a lot of people may not feel comfortable ordering books from Amazon for fear that books may not arrive in time for Christmas or whatever. But I checked, Harvard Bookstore has it, Porter Square Books, and Brookline Books, and several other ones. If you mention the ISBN number to almost any bookstore, they can get it if you're not near Harvard or Brookline. Or just order from Amazon if you're interested. The Amazon US link, I think the Canada link it'll revert to Amazon Canada if you're in Canada. Certainly, the author page it will take you to your local Amazon author page. People outside of the US and Canada or Japan, I always send them to Book Depository because they do worldwide free shipping. I send people there because of the worldwide free shipping. And for a time there, they were the only ones who had it in stock, but Amazon's they've got it all. They've all got it now, and it's shipping. So that's the end of me, except for the questions. So I'll be happy to entertain your questions, but I think Yuko is going to monitor the questions and feed them to me. So thank you for joining us, and I'm ready for your chat.
Yes, John-san, thank you very much for that beautiful presentation. And yes, we have a few questions in chat. I also got a few questions in my direct message.
Okay.
If you have any questions, send them over in chat or in direct message. First and foremost, same question. One said, what time of the year did you travel? The other one says, when is the best time to travel?
Good question, and very important. Peak times on the trail is spring and autumn, April and May. It's very much peak time. Some people start off in March. It can be a little chilly in March. Anyway, April, May, and October, November is the best. I would say September, except if that's typhoon season. And so typhoons will completely wreck any plans, and you don't want to be walking in typhoon winds, believe me. I've been caught in typhoons and it's really scary. So April, May, October, November That's optimal season. What a lot of people who've never been to Japan don't know is Japan can be very hot and sticky in the summer, very. And so if you were doing this in July or something, it would just, or August, it would just be insufferable.
There and
I did
actually,
it. I did it in a car though, in August. We were in a car, so. But there aren't many other pilgrims out and about then.
actually, it's a good question to ask right after you mentioned that, because there was a question that came in that said, "Is there proper dressing? As in, can I go in shorts, for instance?"
Yeah, they're not picky about that, but you might feel a little odd.
As in, you stand out.
Yeah, I mean, people tend to wear proper clothing at temples, whether they're a pilgrim or not. But it's not strict like in Thailand where you just can't enter wearing shorts or short sleeves. You're supposed to be dressed according to what Thais think is proper, which means long pants and all this. They won't even let you in. But it's not like that. I mean, you can enter, you can do almost anything you want in Japan and nobody will say anything. They may look at you like you're nuts, but nobody's ever going to scold you.
Um, Actually, another question is asking how many percentage of the people who go on these pilgrimage do the whole 88 in
One
uh,
go.
one go?
Uh, I'm not aware of that statistic, but a lot of the pilgrims I have met along the way, almost all of them, the ones I interviewed, only one of them had done it. No, two of them had done it continuously. The Japanese woman who's on the front cover, and an Italian guy, Luigi. They did it all in one shot. Other people tend to start off that way with the intention of doing so, but a lot of people develop knee problems or terrible blisters and they just can't go on. I walked with a woman from Tokyo who started off wanting to do the whole thing. She was recovering from an ugly divorce, I believe. We didn't go into it too much, but I sensed that she was trying to get away from that, and she started off on foot, but she couldn't continue that way, so she was doing it on buses and trains and bicycles because her knees gave out.
And as somebody who grew up in Japan, many times I've seen documentaries, series, portrayals of people on the Shikoku pilgrimage, and you're right, people do it, and for many different various reasons.
Yeah,
Some of it is purely tourism, right?
yeah,
They just go to a few
yeah,
famous one on tour buses,
yeah,
and that's okay too. And some
yeah.
people, have various reasons why they do it, either
Yeah.
fully on foot or a combination of a lot of things. And
I'm a little bit influenced by the walking pilgrim, even though they knew that I'm not a walking pilgrim because of my purpose was different and they understood that. So but I sense that there's a little bit of a tendency for walking pilgrims or traditional walking pilgrims, a little bit, they kind of look down on bus pilgrims, and or they tend to not take them very seriously, or they're annoyed by them because the bus unloads and disgorges 20 or 30 pilgrims all at once and kind of disrupts the whole scene. But one of my co-hosts at the last uh, presentation I gave did the bus tour, and he got a lot out of it. And he said that a lot of walking pilgrims, they sort of rush through each temple and they do their little protocols and their little prayers and bow and rinse and then leave as quickly as possible so they can get to the next temple and cover as much territory in one day as they can. He said, where bus pilgrims take their time and they spend more time chanting, and the tour leaders teach them the proper ways of doing things and teach them how to chant properly and where to go. And he got a lot out of it, actually. So I sense that it wasn't good to put down the bus tourists, because there seems to be some value in it. So I've sort of refrained from doing that.
Can you book places ahead of time?
Yeah, yeah. You should. You should. A lot of there's a series of places. I think in the bibliography of the book, there's a if you go kind of list of places that you can find out that information. But there's a kind of amalgamated group of guest houses called Henro Houses, and they're scattered all around the trail, and they take bookings, and some of them speak English. And a lot of times, if you find a lot of pilgrims make friends with other pilgrims, like I made friends with both foreigners and Japanese, but I found that the Japanese pilgrims were more helpful to me because they would help like make reservations for me, or the Japanese language guidebook is a lot more detailed than the English one. And so they were aware of community buses that would take us back to the station where that information would be difficult to find in English or impossible to find. And the Japanese were much more helpful in that way. And, and there's a lot of word of mouth going on down there, but amongst the pilgrims. So, but I tended to tag along with Japanese pilgrims because they're eager to make friends with foreign pilgrims and also practice their English or whatever. But it was very helpful to me, in making reservations. But some of these pilgrim places and temples, sometimes they would almost any place in Japan insists on having a reservation beforehand. They don't really like it if you just show up, and you may be turned away, if it's full. So it's good to have an idea of where you're going to be staying the next night and reserve ahead of time. Both the Japanese and the English guidebooks have all that information of where to stay with phone numbers and all that.
And actually, there were a couple of questions that I received, direct messages, that was comparing this pilgrimage with the Santiago pilgrimage in Europe. Have you talked to people who've done the Santiago and the Shikoku Pilgrimage?
Yeah.
What are some of the stories that you've heard?
Well, the main thing I've been told is that about the difference between the two is the Santiago pilgrimage is UNESCO, and it's supported by the Spanish government and UNESCO. So they receive funds to maintain the trails and help pilgrims along, or somebody gets hurt, to helicopter them out or whatever. They receive funds from the Spanish government and UNESCO to keep it going. Where in Shikoku, it's pure voluntary. They don't receive any money for doing this. So the pilgrim guide people, one of them who had done the Santiago thing, or no, her husband had done it, and he was with us, and that's how I know about that particular detail. And they wanted me to stress in the book that everything in Shikoku is volunteer based, and for Japanese understand this intuitively, but foreigners may not, because they want to travel cheap. But a lot of foreign pilgrims may take advantage of people's hospitality, and in wanting to do it on the cheap, and take advantage too much of it, and without realizing that that bottle of water or that 1,000 yen note that grandma just gave you came from her pension money directly. Nobody helped her financially to help you. Whereas the Spanish government might help pilgrims in Spain, nobody's helping the pilgrims in Japan except for local volunteers. And so to try and not to take too much advantage of that, because some of these people are poor or, old pensioners. And I felt terrible receiving 1,000 yen from some elderly woman who's older than I am. I'm probably better off financially than her, but she's giving me 1,000 yen, and it's not okay to refuse it. You kind of can't do that, because they feel that they are participating in your pilgrimage by helping you. It's vicariously going on a pilgrimage because they can't. So they're going on the pilgrimage with you by helping you. And so refusing it is like saying, no, you can't come with me. And it's not cool to refuse. But at the same time, I don't want to take advantage of that too much either.
And that's the whole beauty of osettai, right?
Yeah.
There's another word that often is associated with osettai, and I think that is omoiyari, the feeling of thinking of the other.
Yeah.
And also, as you mentioned, I think osettai is a way for people to say, please go to these temples on my behalf as well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, like, on the back to refusal of osettai, you really can't do that. So if somebody offers you a bottle of green tea or water or something, but you've already got 2 in your backpack and you really don't need that weight, rather than refuse it, it's better the next little pilgrim hut that you see, just leave it behind in the next hut for the next pilgrim who may need it. That way everybody gets it, sort of passes the osettai along, and without hurting somebody's feelings by refusing it. And then somebody gets a free bottle of water and you don't look like a bastard for refusing it. Everybody's happy if you just accept it and thank them, and then just leave it in the next hut or give it to your Henro, your pilgrim buddy who may need it. Just pass it on.
And John-san, time always flies when we are having such wonderful conversation. There was a zillion, actually, so many questions actually that came in my direct message about the gardens.
Okay.
And in a nutshell,
I'm happy to talk about gardens anytime.
I think we need to invite you back for specific for gardens. But to summarize sort of like the 5 or 6 questions I'm receiving is, 1, what are the 3 major gardens that you talked about? And what are the 2 that you mentioned you liked? And besides that, what is, if I only have chance to go to 1 Japanese garden, where should I
go? Oh, that's tough. All right, well, the 3 main gardens: Kairo-kuen in Mito. That's not my favorite at all. As Koishikawa, Korakuen in Okayama. That's very impressive, Korakuen. And the one in Kanazawa is called?
I should know this.
Yeah.
Mito no Kairakuen, Okayama no Korakuen, Kenrokuen. Yes, thank you. Kanazawa no Kenrokuen.
Kenrokuen is very impressive. And the one in Okayama is very impressive. The one in Mito, to me, is a nothing burger. But I think it has historical reasons.
Yeah, yes. And also,
as a garden aesthetic, I just don't get it. Garden wise, okay, I could go on and on forever about Japanese gardens, but I live around Tokyo, and there are lots of them in Tokyo, and even in Kamakura, which is right next door to me. And they're pretty nice, but none of them are particularly wow compared to what there is in Kyoto. Mm-hmm. And not only Kyoto, but here and there. I find I've been going to Shigaken a lot recently because they have a lot of overflow culture from Kyoto that was without the attitude, and so I've been going to Shigaken a lot because of some of the most fabulous gardens I've seen in Japan or in Shigaken outside of Kyoto. Oh, it's hard to say number one. I have so many favorites. It's ridiculous.
I think we need to really invite you back just to do a Japanese
We
garden.
can. I have a book on it. Okay.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
I see a thumbs up. Oh, are you going to bring us the book?
Yeah.
Actually, while we're waiting, I have to share with our audience one interesting story about Kanazawa no, Kenrokuen. So I went on a honeymoon to Kanazawa. So I went to Kenrokuen. But I also went to Kanazawa when I was still single on my own. Back then, they had the Fufu Matsu. So the couples matsu and pine tree. Both of them, the Otoko Matsu and the Onna Matsu, were healthy and in great shape. The man pine tree and the woman pine tree in great shape. They're attached. When I went back for my honeymoon, the Otoko Matsu was dead. We went to see it again, and unfortunately, it died of disease or something, and only the Onnamatsu was alive. And my husband said, in nature, woman is always stronger. It was sort of like an interesting thing that I never forget from my honeymoon. Funny story. Even that in itself, I think it's worth everybody to go and visit these 3 gardens.
Title's Hidden Gardens of Japan. It's on my Amazon author page, but for some weird reason, it's horribly expensive on Amazon because the publisher's Japanese and they don't really have a international distribution network, and so probably Book Depository would be the place to look for that. Or Amazon Japan, yes. Amazon US, it's outrageously priced.
More reason why I think we need to, one, encourage everybody to please check out John Lander's Amazon page. And 2, maybe they should just buy this book by going to Japan when we can. And 3, I have to say, unfortunately, the pandemics seems to linger on. So more reason why we should enjoy the Shikoku Pilgrimage through John's book. I think this is a little sign that says, let's go and enjoy or imagine we're physically there through the beautiful pictures of John's book. So John-san, I think a big applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for inviting me.
Thank you
for inviting me.
Again, thank you, John-san, for sharing the beautiful pictures from the Shikoku Pilgrimage. And I have to also thank all of you today. Thank you, our friends from Canada. Thank you. I saw today we have participants from Australia and Mexico and pretty much all coasts of America. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for choosing to share the time with us. And as always, check our websites, both Canada and Japan. We try our best to bring very good, high quality Japan programs to you. And we would love to see you in our future programs. So once again, thank you from the bottom of my heart, Johnson, and our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Great. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.